Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. You think hospitals are safe? This happened during my surgery. Neveragain. Scary story, publisher Nye Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. Arrival at the hospital. The drive to the hospital was silent, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional squeak of the windshield wipers as they battled against the relentless rain. Sitting in the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just pre-surgery nerves. There was something about this hospital that sent shivers down my spine. As we pulled into the parking lot, the imposing structure loomed before us, its windows dark and foreboding against the gray sky. My heart pounded in my chest as I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out into the cold, damp air. My husband, David, offered me a reassuring smile, but even his comforting presence couldn't chase away the creeping sense of dread that threatened to consume me. We made our way through the sliding glass doors and into the lobby, where the sickly sweet smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the tiled floor. I clutched David's hand tightly, trying to draw strength from his steady grip as we approached the reception desk. "Sarah Richardson," David said, his voice steady despite the nervous tremor in his hand as he handed over my paperwork. The receptionist nodded curtly, her expression unreadable behind her thick glasses. "Room 203, she said, her voice devoid of warmth as she pointed down the hallway to my left. "The nurse will be with you shortly." I thanked her quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, and followed David down the dimly lit corridor. The walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with their oppressive presence. I tried to focus on the comforting squeeze of David's hand in mine, but even his touch couldn't chase away the gnawing sense of fear that gnawed at my insides. We reached room 203 and stepped inside, the sterile smell of disinfectant assaulting my senses as I crossed the threshold. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with a narrow hospital bed dominating the center of the space. I sank down onto the stiff mattress, the plastic cover crinkling beneath me as I tried to make myself comfortable. David hovered anxiously by my side, his eyes filled with concern as he brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. I nodded, forcing a weak smile into my lips. "I'm fine," I lied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Just a little nervous, that's all." But it wasn't just nerves that plagued me. It was the overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to seep into every corner of this place. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong here, that danger lurked behind every corner, just waiting to pounce. As I lay there, waiting for the nurse to arrive and whisk me away to surgery, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever make it out of this hospital alive. The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I squeezed David's hand tighter, silently praying for the strength to face whatever horrors awaited me beyond these walls. Chapter 2. Preparing for surgery. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed ominously as I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. David stood beside me, his presence a comforting anchor in the sea of uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm me. We waited in silence, the air heavy with anticipation and dread as we waited for the surgical team to arrive. Minutes stretched into eternity before the door finally swung open, admitting a group of medical professionals clad in scrubs and masks. Their faces were obscured, but I could sense the tension radiating off them like waves of heat as they filed into the room. The lead surgeon, Dr. Monroe, stepped forward, his expression grave as he surveyed me with clinical detachment. "Sarah Richardson?" he asked, his voice muffled by the mask covering his face. I nodded, my throat dry as I struggled to find my voice. "That's me." Dr. Monroe nodded curtly, his eyes flicking over the clipboard in his hand. "We'll be performing a routine procedure today," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. "Nothing to worry about." But his words did little to ease the knot of anxiety that had settled in the pit of my stomach. There was something off about Dr. Monroe, something in the way he avoided my gaze and the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he spoke. I tried to push aside my misgivings, chalking them up to pre-surgery jitters, but the sense of unease lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. As the surgical team began to prepare me for the procedure, strange occurrences started happening all around us. Equipment malfunctioned with alarming frequency, forcing the nurses to scramble for replacements as they cursed under their breath. Eerie whispers echoed through the corridors outside, their words too indistinct to make out, but sending shivers down my spine nonetheless. I exchanged a nervous glance with David, but he offered me a reassuring smile, his grip on my hand tightening in silent solidarity. I wanted to believe that everything was going to be okay, that these were just minor hiccups in an otherwise routine surgery, but deep down, I knew better. There was something deeply wrong with this hospital, something sinister lurking beneath its sterile facade, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. As the surgical team finished their preparations and wheeled me out of the room, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever make it out of this hospital alive. The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I clung to David's hand as if it were a lifeline, silently praying for the strength to face whatever horrors awaited me on the operating table. Chapter 3: Anesthesia Nightmare. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as I lay on the operating table, surrounded by a team of masked figures preparing to administer anesthesia. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and anticipation as the anesthesiologist approached with a syringe in hand. "Count backward from 10, he instructed, his voice a distant echo as he pressed the needle against my skin. "By the time you reach 1, you'll be fast asleep." I nodded, my mouth dry as I obeyed his command. 10, 9, 8. But before I could utter another word, darkness descended like a heavy curtain, enveloping me in its suffocating embrace. I drifted into unconsciousness, the world slipping away until there was nothing left but the void. But instead, since the peaceful oblivion I'd expected, I found myself trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Images flickered and danced before my closed eyelids, grotesque and distorted, twisting and contorting into shapes too horrifying to comprehend. I was standing in the hospital lobby, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as shadows danced along the walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me from the darkness. I tried to move, to flee from this nightmarish landscape, but my limbs felt heavy and sluggish, as if I were wading through molasses. Panic rose in my chest like a tide, threatening to overwhelm me as I stumbled forward, desperate to escape. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something malevolent and hungry, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I could hear its rasping breath on the back of my neck, feel its icy fingers brushing against my skin. I stumbled and fell, the cold tile floor slamming into my knees as I struggled to crawl away. But it was no use. The darkness swallowed me whole, dragging me down into its depths until there was nothing left but the void. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended, and I found myself back in the operating room, the steady beat of the heart monitor the only sound in the silent room. I blinked away the remnants of the dream, my heart still racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew that this was no ordinary dream. This was a warning, a glimpse into the darkness that lurked within the walls of this hospital. And as the anesthesia wore off and I was pulled back into consciousness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting to drag me back into the nightmare once more. Chapter 4. Waking Up in Fear. I blinked groggily, my eyelids heavy as I struggled to regain consciousness. The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed in my ears, a reassuring reminder that I was still alive. Slowly, the fog began to lift, and I became aware of my surroundings once more. I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by sterile white walls and the soft glow of fluorescent lights overhead. The room was eerily quiet, save for the occasional shuffling of feet in the hallway outside. My head throbbed with a dull ache, and every movement sent a wave of pain rippling through my body. I tried to sit up. My muscles protested, weak and uncooperative. Panic fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird as I struggled against the invisible bonds that held me captive. Where was David? Why wasn't he here by my side, offering me comfort and reassurance? And then, as if on cue, the door swung open, admitting a familiar figure into the room. Relief flooded through me like a tidal wave as David rushed to my side, his face pale with worry as he took my hand in his. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God you're awake." I managed a weak smile, my throat dry as I tried to speak. What? What happened?" David's expression darkened, and he glanced around the room as if searching for eavesdroppers. "The surgery didn't go as planned," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There were complications." My heart lurched in my chest, a cold knot of fear settling in the pit of my stomach. "What kind of complications?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David hesitated, his gaze flicking over my face before he spoke. "They found something." "Unexpected," he said cryptically, "but the doctors assured me that you're going to be okay." But his words did little to ease the gnawing sense of unease that twisted in my gut. What had they found? And why was David being so evasive about it? I opened my mouth to press him for answers, but before I could speak, a sharp pain shot through my side, stealing the breath from my lungs. I cried out, clutching at my abdomen as the pain flared to life, burning and relentless. David's grip on my hand tightened, his face etched with concern as he glanced around the room for help. But as his eyes scanned the shadows lurking in the corners, I saw something flicker behind them, something dark and primal that sent a shiver down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain subsided, leaving me gasping for air as I collapsed back against the pillows. David hovered anxiously by my side, his brow furrowed with worry as he brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. I nodded weakly, my heart still racing in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I know that this was only the beginning of the nightmare that awaited me, a nightmare from which there would be no escape. Chapter 5. Haunted Hallways. I pushed myself upright in bed, my muscles protesting with every movement. The events of the previous chapter lingered in my mind like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the sterile hospital room. With David's help, I'd swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood, the cold tile floor sending a shiver up my spine. "I need to stretch my legs," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, his expression grave as he followed me out into the dimly lit corridor. The hospital seemed different now, somehow darker and more foreboding than before. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls as we made our way down the deserted hallway. With each step, my heart pounded in my chest, a steady drumbeat of fear and anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a ghostly figure looming in the shadows, but the corridor was empty save for the two of us. We rounded a corner, and a chill swept through the air, raising goosebumps on my skin. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself as we continued down the seemingly endless corridor. But as we walked, strange things began to happen. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of movement, fleeting and ephemeral. Ghostly apparitions darted in and out of doorways, their faces twisted in expressions of agony and despair. I blinked, rubbing my eyes in disbelief, but when I looked again, they were gone, leaving nothing but empty corridors in their wake. Unsettling noises echoed through the halls, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. I strained to listen, but the footsteps seemed to come from all directions at once, disorienting and confusing me. David squeezed my hand reassuringly, but even his touch couldn't chase away the creeping sense of dread that threatened to consume me. Paranoia set in, gnawing at the edges of my mind as I struggled to discern reality from hallucination. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking menace, every creak of the floorboards a portent of impending doom. I quickened my pace, desperate to escape the haunted hallways that seemed to close in around me like a vice. But no matter how fast we walked, the corridors stretched on and on, twisting and turning in on themselves like a maze. I glanced up at the flickering lights overhead, their dim glow casting long, sinister shadows on the walls. And as we pressed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into the heart of darkness, with no hope of escape. Chapter 6: Uncovering Dark Secrets. The hospital's history loomed before me like a labyrinth, its twists and turns shrouded in darkness and mystery. With each passing moment, the sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air grew stronger, urging me to delve deeper into the shadows and uncover the truth that lay hidden within its walls. I sat at the small desk in my hospital room, a laptop open before me as I scoured the internet for information. David stood beside me, his brow furrowed with concern as he watched me dig deeper into the hospital's past. "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice quiet with apprehension. I glanced up at him, my eyes weary from hours of searching. "Answers," I replied, my voice tinged with determination. "There's something not right about this place, David. I can feel it in my bones." David nodded, his expression grave as he took a seat beside me. Together, we combed through news articles and online forums, piecing together fragments of information like a jigsaw puzzle. And slowly, the pieces began to fall into place, revealing a disturbing pattern of events that stretched back decades. Mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances, whispers of corruption, and cover-ups that lingered like a stain on the hospital's reputation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the accounts, each one more chilling than the last. "It's like something out of a horror movie," David murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart heavy with dread, as I clicked on another article, my fingers trembling with anticipation. And then there was the missing piece of the puzzle that tied everything together. A series of experiments conducted in the hospital's basement, hidden away from prying eyes. Human subjects subjected to unspeakable horrors in the name of scientific advancement. I felt bile rise in my throat as I read through the details, the words blurring together in a nauseating haze. They were experimenting on people, I whispered, my voice hollow with disbelief. David's grip on my hand tightened, his expression grim as he processed the information. "But why?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. I shook my head, my mind reeling with the implications. I don't know, my voice barely a whisper. But whatever they were doing down there, it wasn't for the greater good. And I have a feeling that it's still going on, even now. As the gravity of our discovery sank in, a cold knot of fear tightened in my chest. The hospital's dark secrets stretched out before us like a yawning chasm, and I knew that if we were to survive this nightmare, we would need to confront the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. Chapter 7. Confronting the Unknown. The hospital staff bustled about, their faces drawn tight with tension as I approached the front desk, determination burning in my chest like a raging inferno. I had to know the truth, had to confront the darkness that lurked within these walls before it consumed me entirely. "Excuse me," I say, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside me. "I need to speak to someone in charge." The receptionist glanced up from her computer, her eyes narrowing with suspicion as she regarded me with thinly veiled hostility. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped and dismissive. "I need to know what's going on in this hospital," I said, my voice rising with urgency. "There have been strange occurrences, unexplained deaths." I need answers, but the receptionist's expression remained impassive, her lips pressed into a thin line as she regarded me with cool detachment. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her tone bordering on condescension. "This hospital is perfectly safe." I felt a surge of frustration rise in my chest, threatening to boil over as I struggled to contain my anger. How could they be so blind, so willfully ignorant of the horrors that lurked just beneath the surface? I clenched my fists at my sides, my nails biting into my palms as I fought to keep my composure. "I don't believe you," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "There's something going on here, something sinister and dark. And I'm going to find out what it is, no matter what." With that, I turned on my heel and stormed away from the front desk, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way through the hospital corridors. Every step felt like a battle, every breath a struggle against the suffocating weight of denial and deceit. But despite the hostility and resistance I encountered at every turn, I refused to back down. I was on a mission now, a quest for truth and justice that burned brighter than any fear or doubt. And as I delved deeper into the hospital's secrets, I knew that I was getting closer to uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. With each passing moment, the darkness seemed to close in around me, threatening to swallow me whole. But I refused to be intimidated, refused to let fear dictate my actions. I would confront the unknown head-on, armed with nothing but my determination and my unwavering resolve. And as I embarked on this perilous journey into the heart of darkness, I knew that there would be no turning back. The truth awaited me, beckoning me forward with promises of redemption and salvation. And I would not rest until I had uncovered every last secret that lay hidden within these haunted halls. Chapter 8. Escalating Terror. The line between dreams and reality blurred with each passing moment, until it became impossible to distinguish one from the other. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking menace, every flicker of movement a portent of impending doom. And as the horror intensified, I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. I tossed and turned in my hospital bed, the sheets twisted around my body as I struggled to break free from the suffocating grip of fear. The room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the moon filtering in through the window. But even in the darkness, I could feel eyes watching me, unseen and malevolent. I glanced around the room, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for the source of the disturbance. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadowy figure lurking in the corner, its form shifting and twisting like smoke in the wind. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the figure drew closer, its footsteps echoing in the silent room. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my lips as the figure loomed over me, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it was upon me, its icy fingers wrapping around my throat in a vice-like grip. I gasped for air, struggling against the unseen force that held me captive as darkness threatened to consume me whole. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended, and I found myself back in the hospital room, drenched in sweat and shaking with fear. David stirred beside me, his brow furrowed with concern as he reached out to comfort me. "Sarah, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. I clung to him desperately, the memory of the encounter still fresh in my mind. "I saw something," I whispered, my voice trembling with fear. "Something in the room with us." David's expression darkened, and he glanced around the room as if searching for hidden threats. "There's nothing here, Sarah," he said, his tone reassuring. "It was just a bad dream." But I knew other. I could still feel the chill of the figure's touch on my skin, still hear the echoes of its footsteps in the darkness. And as the terror of the encounter washed over me once more, I knew that this was only the beginning of the horrors that awaited us in this accursed place. With each passing moment, the terror escalated until it felt like the walls themselves were closing in around us. Vengeful spirits lurked in the shadows, their eyes burning with hatred and malice as they whispered curses and incantations that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to fight back, to banish the darkness that threatened to consume us, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with nothing but my bare hands. The horror was relentless, unyielding, and I knew that if we were to survive, we would need to confront it head-on, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. Rice Against Time. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each passing moment dragging on like an eternity as I fought to escape the hospital's suffocating grasp. The air hung heavy with the stench of decay, and every shadow seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled through the dimly lit corridors, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls like a funeral dirge. The hospital seemed to loom over me like a malevolent giant, its walls closing in around me as I struggled to maintain my grip on reality. But with each passing moment, my sanity slipped further from my grasp, like grains of sand slipping through my fingers. I could feel the tendrils of madness wrapping around me like a vice, threatening to drag me down into the abyss. I pressed on, driven by a desperate need to escape, to unravel the mystery that had ensnared me in its web. But the hospital seemed to twist and shift around me, its layout changing with every turn until I was hopelessly lost in a labyrinth of shadow and despair. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, I heard it, a soft whispering in the darkness, like the rustle of leaves on a cold winter's night. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen. "Sora." The voice was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it sent a chill down my spine. I turned, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but the corridor was empty save for the flickering lights overhead. I took a hesitant step forward, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the silence. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a flicker of movement in the darkness, a shapeless figure looming just beyond the edge of my vision. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare, a grotesque parody of a human form, its features twisted and contorted into a grotesque mask of agony. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls as I fled from the specter that pursued me. But no matter how fast I ran, it seemed to follow, its shadowy form looming ever closer until I could feel its icy breath on the back of my neck. I could feel my grip on sanity slipping, like water through my fingers, as I struggled to hold on. But I refused to surrender, refused to let the darkness consume me entirely. I had to find a way out, had to unravel the mystery before it was too late. With renewed determination, I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced against time itself. The hospital seemed to stretch out before me, like a never-ending maze, its corridors twisting and turning in on themselves, until I was hopelessly lost in a sea of shadows. But still, I refused to give up hope. With each step, I felt a flicker of defiance burn within me, driving me forward, even as the darkness threatened to consume me. I would confront my deepest fears. I would unravel the mystery that had ensnared me, and I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. Descent into Madness. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, merging into a twisted tapestry of madness as I spiraled deeper into the abyss. Haunting memories clawed at the edges of my mind, their tendrils snaking through the darkness like vengeful specters, threatening to consume me whole. I wandered through the hospital corridors like a lost soul, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls as I struggled to hold on to my sanity. But with each passing moment, the darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its malevolent presence. Haunting whispers echoed in my ears, their words indistinct but filled with a palpable sense of dread. I tried to block them out, to focus on the task at hand, but they burrowed into my mind like worms, gnawing away at my sanity until there was nothing left but madness. And then, like a dam breaking, the memories flooded back, overwhelming me with their intensity. I saw flashes of blood and pain, of faces twisted in agony and despair. I heard screams, echoing in the darkness, their echoes reverberating through the corridors like a symphony of madness. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the cold tile floor as I struggled to push myself upright. But the memories kept coming, relentless and unforgiving, tearing through the fragile facade of my sanity like tissue paper. I screams, a primal, guttural sound that echoed through the halls like a lamentation. But there was no one to hear me, no one to offer solace or comfort in the face of the encroaching darkness. I clutched at my head, my fingers tangling in my hair as I fought to hold on to reality. But it slipped through my grasp like water, leaving me gasping for breath as I tumbled further into the abyss. I saw faces in the shadows, twisted and contorted into grotesque caricatures of humanity. I heard voices whispering my name, their words like daggers in my mind as they drove me further, and further into the madness. I tried to run, to escape the nightmare that threatened to consume me, but there was no escape. The hospital was a prison, its walls closing in around me like a vice, trapping me in a never-ending cycle of torment and despair. And as I descended further into madness, I knew that there was no going back. The line between reality and nightmare had been irrevocably blurred, and I was lost in the darkness, doomed to wander its halls for all eternity. Chapter 11. Final Confrontation. The air crackled with tension as I stood at the threshold of the hospital's darkest depths, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of impending doom. Shadows danced and flickered along the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at me with malevolent intent. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle that lay ahead. This was it, the final confrontation, the moment when everything would be decided. I couldn't afford to falter now, couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I had to summon all my courage and strength if I was to stand any chance of vanquishing the evil that lurked within these walls. With a trembling hand, I pushed open the door and stepped into the darkness beyond. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and every step sent a shiver down my spine as I navigated the labyrinthine corridors that stretched out before me like a maze of nightmares. And then, at last, I saw it, a swirling vortex of darkness, pulsating with an otherworldly energy that sent a chill down my spine. This was the source of the evil that had plagued the hospital, the malevolent force that had driven me to the brink of madness. I squared my shoulders, steeling myself for the battle to come. There was no turning back now. I had come too far to let fear hold me back. With a fierce cry, I charged forward, my fists clenched tight as I prepared to face my greatest foe. The darkness seemed to recoil at my approach, its tendrils writhing and twisting as if in pain. But I pressed on, my determination unwavering as I closed the distance between us. And then, with a surge of primal energy, I launched myself at the heart of the darkness, my fists connecting with a satisfying thud. The force of the impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, and for a moment it seemed as if the darkness might consume me whole. But I refused to give up, refused to let fear dictate my actions. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I fought back, striking blow after blow against the swirling mass of darkness, until at last, with a deafening roar, it began to crumble and fade away. I stood panting in the aftermath, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline as I surveyed the wreckage around me. The darkness was gone, banished back to whatever hellish realm it had come from, and in its place there was only silence. But as I turned to leave, a voice echoed in the darkness, soft and haunting in its intensity. "Thank you, Sarah," it whispered, sending shivers down my spine. I paused, my heart skipping a beat as I searched the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, only the empty corridors stretching out before me like a yawning chasm. And then, with a final glance over my shoulder, I stepped out into the light, leaving the darkness behind me once and for all. The battle was won, but the scars it had left behind would linger for a lifetime. Chapter 12. Escape, or Eternal Damnation. The hospital loomed behind me like a malevolent spectre as I stumbled out into the cool night air, my heart racing in my chest as I put as much distance between myself and those haunted halls as possible. But even as I fled into the darkness, I knew that the horror would follow me wherever I went. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets as I raced through the night, the chill wind biting at my skin as if trying to drag me back into the abyss. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to overwhelm me with its suffocating embrace. But still, I pressed on, driven by a desperate need to escape, to leave the nightmare behind me once and for all. I couldn't go back, couldn't return to the darkness that had threatened to consume me whole. I had to keep moving, had to find a way to break free from the shackles that bound me to this cursed place. And yet, even as I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister lurked just beyond the edge of my vision. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadows of the hospital looming in the distance, but the streets were empty save for the faint glow of streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned down a narrow alleyway, the darkness swallowing me whole as I disappeared into its depths. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pursued, that the horror was hot on my heels, waiting to drag me back into its clutches. I stumbled and fell, my knees scraping against the rough pavement as I struggled to pick myself up. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes as I gasped for breath, the weight of the nightmare pressing down on me like a leaden cloak. But still, I refused to give up hope. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I pushed myself to my feet and continued on, driven by a fierce determination to break free from the chains that bound me to this cursed place. As I fled into the night, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever truly be free from the nightmare that had unfolded within the hospital's walls. Would the horror follow me wherever I went, haunting me like a ghost until the end of days? Or would I find a way to escape its clutches once and for all, leaving the darkness behind me like a distant memory? Only time would tell, but for now, all I could do was keep running, keep fleeing into the unknown, praying that someday, somehow, I would find the peace and redemption I so desperately sought.